Oh, hi there. This is Landvaettr, a new GM crafter on YouTube. So I've been thinking lately. I've been doing a lot of new crafts, and I thought, why not start my new channel? You know, show you guys what I do and how I do it. What do you think about it? Come on, let's get to it. So this is my latest craft. I believe it's called a hoarding in English. It comes from the French word hoard. It was a defense structure that was set that was built on top of battlements to protect defenders against projectiles and just weather conditions. Very old type of defense. If I'm correct, Julius Caesar in his War of the Gauls mentions structure very similar to these. So yeah, pretty old stuff. They were used throughout the Dark Ages and most of the Middle Ages. They were abandoned during the 15th century because of cannons, and cannonballs would break those stuff. Plus, being made out of wood, they could be set on fire pretty easily. So yeah, they were abandoned during the 15th century, but they were used mostly during Dark Ages and Middle Ages. You don't see many of them nowadays on Castle, obviously, because they've been destroyed and haven't been rebuilt. But I can think of some castles still have those reconstructed. We've got a city, we've got a castle in France called Carcassonne. It's a huge fortified city, wonderful city, and they definitely have hoarding in good shape. They've also got these slate roofs, which I really like, so I tried to do it. I think they came out great. Most of the time on hoardings during the Middle Ages, the roofs were just plain wood or with leather, on top, not slate. But in south of France, they definitely used slate, so I used it. I think it looks great. I'll show you how to do it. It's not very complicated. It's just very tedious, very long. So let me show you how to put it, because it's modular. Everything I do is modular. So I've done those walls that can be used stacked up. I've got several of them. Can be used to form higher walls, or just right flats. You can do a house, and you can set your hoarding on top of the wall. I think it looks really great. But let me show you the inside, because it's really the inside that is interesting. So there you go. Oops, you can lift it. So if you're doing wargaming set in the Middle Ages, with sieges and stuff, I really recommend using those. But even if you're doing RPG, more like D&D type of gameplay, use those. I mean, I don't do wargaming; it's actually for role playing, and these are great because they're not the usual just wall walk, on battlement. That is boring as hell. You've got several zones. So let me take 2 minutes and I'll show you. Let's say this is your player. Okay, you can have a face-to-face right there, or a fight right there on this zone. But you can also have this character choosing to be more careful and sneak. Sneak by the guards when they come, or jump on them and have advantages. There's that. There's the battlements. You can actually go around the crenellation, and so this is pretty interesting. And also you've got this zone with the matriculation. It's it's the holes through where the defenders would throw rocks on top of the attackers that would go below. So you got the matriculation. So if there's a fight right there, the characters are gonna have to make some dex checks. Everything can happen. A player could have his character, have his foot going through the matriculation, getting disadvantages. The enemy could end up through the matriculation and crashing on the rocks below the walls and stuff. So yeah, pretty funny stuff. And you've got a piece that allows you to do some very gameplay. You can even have a fire put somewhere. Many stuff can happen with wood. I mean, hell, you've even got the roof. So if you manage to get your miniature, standing here, you can have an epic fight on the rooftops. So pretty neat, right? So quit beating around the bush. I'm gonna show you how to build those. Let's do it. Okay, we're gonna start by building the base out of foam core. We're using 8mm thick foam core. We're gonna do some trenches cut in the foam core every 4 centimeters. So there you go. Gonna be using my hot wire. Using chopsticks to do the wooden beams, but of course you can use just foam core. I prefer using real wood. So of course I'm going to reuse the rest of the chopsticks for something else, for another build. We're gonna do the base for the battlements, for the crenellation. There we go. Okay. And now we're using coffee stirrers. Very often crafters tend to use, ice cream popsicles. They can be useful, but honestly, for planks, the coffee stirrers are way more up to scale, and they're actually cheaper. You can buy a whole bunch of them on Amazon, so I really like those stirrers to make planks. They're thinner, easier to cut, and yeah, more to scale. So if you're doing some floors, you should consider using those stirrers. Just simple coffee stirrers. So I'm gonna do the flooring right there. Okay. If you're doing the same piece, I would recommend for the length of the piece using the length of the stairs, because I'm not exactly sure why I wanted to do this piece longer, but it's a bit stupid. So I mean, it's pretty neat anyway, but you could just make it shorter and use the length of the stairs. Gonna do the beams that are under the structure to hold it together. Once again, I'm doing it out of chopsticks, but you can do it out of foam. But I don't like really the foam actually has a texture. You know, it's very useful for stone. It's grainy, but for wood, I don't really like it. I prefer actual wood. Okay, so now we're gonna cut the crenellations. I don't really care for this foam. It was the thickest I had, but I didn't really like the texture. Okay, so now I'm gonna bevel the front. Crenellation is often bevel in front because of hoarding that were supposed to be set on top. So yeah. Now I'll carve them. Okay, so we're gonna put them in line. Gonna make sure the miniatures are able to stand between every crenellation. That's for gameplay. Okay, we're gonna do this part now. Okay, we're going to use these skewers to make the upper part of the hoarding. So keep the spikes. I'm going to use them for later. Later I'm going to use them to make some kind of trap. We're going to use basically all of the skewer. The upper part's going to go attached to the roof, and these smaller parts that I'm cutting are going to go below. I didn't want something very high that would be in the way of my hands when I cut the minis, but I wanted something that would remind us of a wooden post. We're gluing the wooden beams that reinforce the structure and connect the hoarding to the wall. Okay, now we're going to start the roof. So I'm using just simple cardboard. Take a thin cardboard. It's got to be a bit sturdy, but you know, pretty thin. And we're gonna set it, you see, diagonally. You don't have to do this. It's gonna be under. It won't really be visible, but you know. Okay, now we're gonna take some very thin cardboard and we're gonna make the slate roof. So it's good if you find a very thin cardboard and if it's partially plastic on one side. I'm gonna take measure. Straps are gonna be like 1 centimeter wide, and the tires are gonna be like 5 millimeters wide. I think I made about 16 of them, but I think one remains, so yeah. If you want to make them small like this, it's gonna take a long time. That's how I cut it. You can actually be a bit faster if you do it. I was in front of the camera, so I was standing up, so you can get it done a bit faster, but it definitely takes time. And you're gonna score it this way on each side, just to make a small bevel for the tiles. There you go, on one side and on the other. Now I figured out that if you use the X-Acto knife, and cut below like a triangle each time before cutting the separation between the tiles, it's actually a little faster, but it's gonna take time anyway, so I suggest you do that in front of a movie or some kind of show. I remember I did those in front of Rick and Morty. So we're gonna make sure for the first row to make it hang out this way. The rest is fairly self-explanatory, it just takes time. But just make sure the tiles are positioned alternated. Okay, finishing up. Curing the excess. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna base coat it. I suggest horizontal strokes to make sure that the paint, the primer, goes everywhere. Okay, so now we're gonna use some silver to make them pop out a little bit. So we're gonna accentuate the edge, the cut edge of the slate, as if it was catching the light, and it's gonna make this roof pop out. So I'm gonna use a straight, you know, it's dry brushing. I'm gonna use some silver and just hitting the front of the slate, but also breaking up a little bit the pattern somewhere. Putting a bit more silver some places. We're gonna do a wash. We're gonna do a wash using Prussian blue, very diluted, and I'm gonna just put a healthy wash over this roof. We're gonna try to make it match the first piece. Great. Now some highlights again. Now remember, you can just bypass this. This part is actually really long, you know, to cut all the slates. So I'm using the Dremel to punch holes in the hoarding. If you don't have a Dremel, you could do it before gluing everything. I know it's not very pretty, but I wanted something that was useful. Then again, I didn't want the post to be very high, so I had to have the lowest parts connected to the hoarding flooring and the highest parts connected to the roof. But I didn't want something too high, because I didn't want anything that would go in the way of the hand when you try to catch the minis. So. Okay, we're putting some glue, wood glue, and making it, leaving it for it to cure. Now we're gonna go for paints. I'm gonna go with a very clear brown, sort of nutmeg brown. I'm not using miniature paints. I'm using acrylic, you know, very common acrylic. For models and for terrain, I don't use the expensive stuff. I mean, the usual stuff, just, you know, it does the job. There you go. Done and done. Okay, now I'm carving the stones out of the foam core. Actually, you should really do this before building all the hoarding on top. I just completely forgot, so I'm doing it right now. So yeah, do it before, it's gonna be a lot simpler. I'm also using the ballpoint pen to engrave the foam. So first you score with the X-Acto knife, then you use the ballpoint pen to widen the crevices between stones. There you go. This part you should also do before, but I completely forgot. You're gonna roll up some aluminum foil and make yourself some kind of stamp just to give the foam some rocky texture. So now we're gonna paint the rocks. I'm gonna use a very light kind of ivory. You know, most castles I see for D&D are being built and painted very gray, very dark, but actually most castles were made out of limestone, so very easy to cut, very common and easy to cut stone. And limestone is pretty clear, so I'm gonna do this kind of ivory. Of course, I'm gonna do some kind of wash. Hindsight, afterwards, I understood I should have done some kind of coating, some kind of base coat, dark base coat. You're gonna see why afterwards. But yeah, I was going for something very, very light, so I went directly for the color and then did a wash, black wash. To make sure the recesses of the stones would appear darker. Now you're gonna add some light gray, very, very slight dry brush on the front of the hoarding, because obviously this wood is going to be subject to a lot of rain, wind, a lot of distress. So yeah, I wanted to show that the wood was a bit aged, a bit damaged by the weather, you know. So it's gonna give this more distressed look. You can use it mostly for the outside, because the inside is supposed to be covered by the roof, so the inside is going to be more protected. You can put some gray, to show some distress, but you're going to mainly use it for the outside. You don't have to do this, but wood tend to get a bit more gray if it stands outside, because of humidity and wind. So now I'm gonna do the wash. So it's a wash with black, very diluted. and it's gonna go in the recesses. You probably know the trick, you know, it's just a wash. We're gonna add some highlights afterwards. Okay, stop. See what I'm doing here? Don't do that. That's stupid. That's a moronic thing to do. Okay? I really don't know what I was thinking about using water on top of wood, because I basically had to rebuild part of my build because of that. I really should have gone for a base coat black and then brown. I didn't do it. I added this wash and it really was very stupid of me. So don't do that. Just do a regular black base coat and then put up the brown. You know? Okay, so now we're putting highlights on top of our stones, just to make the texture pop out. Here I'm actually going for a straight white. At first I began with slightly lighter ivory, but I'm gonna go with white. It's gonna be fine. Use your brush really horizontally. Make sure you only hit the parts that really stand out. See, the details really pop out now. Oh, we're almost finished. Only thing left to do is to varnish it. I know many crafters tend to use, washed down PVA glue. Honestly, I had this varnish left, so I'm gonna use it. It's gonna protect the paints. It's also gonna stick the pieces together and give it extra strength. Okay, so this is the final piece. Hopefully you like this tutorial. Don't hesitate to give me feedback, you can leave a comment below. If you like the video, don't hesitate to subscribe. This is Land signing off. Stay crafty, guys.